Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington after a blockbuster primary night in Texas and North Carolina, where the stakes could not be higher with the control of Congress up for grabs this November. We'll have much more on the key results and biggest takeaways from the first primaries of the 2026 midterms coming up. But we begin with the intensifying war in the Middle East and the administration defending its military operations in Iran and its efforts to evacuate Americans caught in the crossfire. It comes as we have brand new NBC News polling showing voters are skeptical of the mission and the president's handling of it. These are hot off the press. Take a look. 52% of registered voters saying the U.S. should not have taken military action against Iran. 54% saying they disapprove of the president's handling of the situation. Diving deeper, Republicans largely standing behind the president, Democrats largely critical. But take a look. Independent voters, 61% saying they disapprove compared to just 28% who approve. Today, my NBC colleague Garrett Haake pressing White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt in her first briefing since the war began. Take a look.
Does the president believe the country supports the actions that he's taken so far in Iran?
I think he does, and I think the president knows the country is smart enough to read past many of the fake news headlines produced by people in this room that this action was unjustifiable. Again, this is a rogue terrorist regime that has been threatening the United States, our allies, and our people for 47 years, and the American people are smart enough to know that.
Last hour, President Trump touting the success of the U.S. war on Iran. Take a listen.
We're doing very well on the war front, to put it mildly, I would say. Somebody said, on a scale of 10, where would you rate it? I said about a 15. For 47 years, we were pushed around, and we shouldn't have been. And I think I can say, and you see it as well as I do, you see the tremendous progress that's being made. Their missiles are being wiped out rapidly. Their launchers are being wiped out. They're attacking their neighbors. They're attacking their, in some cases, allies, or not so long ago allies. And, you know, it's really a nation that was out of control.
Also this morning, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth projecting confidence, saying the U.S. is winning, quote, decisively and without mercy, and saying the U.S. and Israel will soon have control over Iran's skies.
The two most powerful air forces in the world will have complete control of Iranian skies, uncontested airspace. I hope all the folks watching understand what uncontested airspace and complete control means. It means we will fly all day, all night, day and night, finding, fixing, and finishing the missiles and defense industrial base of the Iranian military, finding and fixing their leaders and their military leaders. And as President Trump said, more and larger waves are coming. We are just getting started. We are accelerating, not decelerating.
Now, in that briefing, the Pentagon also releasing this stunning video of what it says is the moment a U.S. submarine launched a torpedo to sink an Iranian warship in international waters. As the U.S. military campaign accelerates right now, the Senate is about to vote on a resolution to rein in the administration's war powers. That vote is expected to fail. Meanwhile, the Trump administration continues to work to get Americans stranded in the Middle East out of the region. The White House saying it's working to charter flights and urging Americans to register with the State Department. We're also learning the identities of 4 of the 6 U.S. service members killed after an Iranian drone attack on U.S. military facility in Kuwait. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt saying today the president will attend the dignified transfer of those American troops. Joining me now is NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba, NBC News chief foreign correspondent, and NBC News senior national security correspondent Courtney Kube. Richard Engel, of course, is our chief foreign correspondent. Thanks to all of you for being here. Monica, let me start with you. And this latest polling that shows a majority of registered voters actually disapprove of the president's handling of the situation in Iran. Any reaction there from the administration? Do you think that could impact the strategy in Iran at all?
Well, I do think it's something that they will be very closely tracking, Kristen. I think they are aware of the idea that just 5 days into a war, Americans have a sense that could be very different 5 days from now or 5 weeks from now, depending on how long this conflict actually goes. And if you dive deeper into our new poll and you look at it across party lines, it is fairly polarized. You are seeing mostly Democrats who say they disapprove of that, but there are some Republicans and some independents who have concerns and who are basically saying that they disapprove of this, maybe because they don't know enough about it, and maybe they can't justify why the president initially took this decision. And that is really something that the White House and the Trump administration has spent a lot of time talking about, answering questions about in the last couple of days. And I think that is where this story is really going when you talk about it from the polling and from the political perspective, because attitudes can really change and they can shift depending on whether people don't like the explanations that they're getting or whether they're conflicting or confusing. The White House tried to push back on that narrative a little bit today, saying that they feel they've been clear in their objectives. But we know, Kristen, that even senior top administration officials have offered varying reasons and justifications for why this massive war began in the first place.
Yeah, well, and you also have some new reporting about that phone call between President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. What can you tell us about that, Mon?
Yeah, and this took place about 9 days ago, we understand. Now, look, the Prime Minister of Israel has been in touch with the President, with the White House, repeatedly, consistently urging the U.S. to consider striking Iran, to really take the ballistic missile program threat seriously. And now we know that in that phone conversation, the Prime Minister indicated to the President that he believed, according to Israeli intelligence, that the Ayatollah and some of his top deputies, some top Iranian officials, were going to be in the same place at the same time on Saturday. And that is why we understand from the White House that factored into the president's decision making. Now, they said that wasn't the only reason that he decided to strike this past weekend, but it did factor in. In fact, the White House press secretary Caroline Leavitt today said he acted based on a feeling that was based on fact, but that was one of the factors certainly that made the president decide he wanted to, in conjunction with Israel, launch these massive, massive strikes that ultimately ended up killing the Ayatollah and dozens of other leaders, as the president told you later that day, Kristen.
It's just fascinating. And of course, we've been talking about the effort to try to get the Americans who are stuck in the Middle East out. What's your latest reporting on that, Monica?
And I think the administration has tried to approach this with a little more urgency today after there has been an outcry of confusion and from Americans themselves who are stuck in some of these countries asking for help. Initially, the State Department said try to get out commercially if you can. The airspace is closed in many of these countries. The airports are shut down. Flights are canceled. So that was very, very difficult. But we are learning now today that there are other options potentially. In fact, we had the chairman of the Joint Chiefs telling our own Courtney Kube that there are going to be some spots potentially opening up on military aircraft on C-17. So that's one possibility. And in addition to that, the State Department says they are working on getting some flights chartered from the region to the United States. But they don't want to share details on that given the possible security risks and the timing there. Kristen.
Yeah, and certainly an immense amount of urgency to bring those Americans home. Monica, thank you. Richard, let me turn to you. Let's pick up on where Monica left off, which is the effort to try to bring Americans home. What are you hearing, including about the latest on airspace closures?
There's a lot of concern. A lot of people in this entire region are trying to figure out their travel plans, trying to get to airports where airports are opening up, because not every airport is closed in this region. Some flights do appear to be going back online. The number of incoming Iranian strikes is not consistent. It is not everywhere, and there are certain airlines that are trying to find gaps. But this conflict is also spreading to new countries. So air travel is disrupted all across the region. Land borders are generally the easiest and safest way for people to travel right now. For example, just a short while ago, Turkey said that NATO intercepted an Iranian missile that went into Turkish airspace. Until now, the Istanbul airport has been one of the main airports that people have been using to transit in and out of this region. So when you have a moving conflict, and this very much is a moving conflict, there are thousands, tens of thousands of people trying to get home and not sure where they should go. Another place where the conflict is expanding right now is Lebanon. Israel just a short while ago launched a new wave of attacks against Lebanon, targeting Hezbollah leaders. And the leader of Hezbollah, which is an Iranian-backed militia group based in southern Lebanon and in southern Beirut, the leader said that Hezbollah joined this fight, would continue to fight, and will fight into the end. So we could see even more of an escalating conflict in Lebanon. Some flights, however, are going back online in Gulf countries. So this is very much a moving target, a moving conflict. And for the people trying to figure out how to get out, it is undeniably extraordinarily difficult, and many people are nervous.
Absolutely. Nervous there, nervous here in the United States, Richard, for their loved ones. Let me ask you about what is happening in terms of the leadership structure inside Iran. There had been a farewell ceremony apparently scheduled to begin today for the Ayatollah Khamenei. It's now been postponed. That's according to Iranian state media. Meanwhile, Iranian leadership saying they're close to choosing a replacement for the supreme leader. Is that accurate? What are you hearing?
A lot of conflicting reports. The leadership in Iran is in a state of disarray. The Iranian officials have already said that the military is operating somewhat independently, that the units of the guard force there are operating on old orders, that they have gone underground, that they're limiting their communication. So you have a government and a military that is already starting to fracture. Iran did announce that it is postponing the funeral for the late supreme leader. They had announced that they were going to elect a new supreme leader soon. There were some reports, including in the New York Times, other Iranian experts have said that the leading candidate is the late Ayatollah Khamenei's son, Mojtaba. But there's been no confirmation. He has not been announced as the new supreme leader of Iran. And that decision will be critical because they could elect a hardliner who decides to keep this war going at all costs, or it is possible that they choose someone that is willing to reach a deal, that is more willing to compromise, potentially negotiate with President Trump. So that is a critical decision.
All right, Richard Engel, thank you so much. Please stay safe, Richard. We really appreciate your bringing your reporting to us. Thank you for that. Courtney, let me turn to you. There was another briefing at the Pentagon today. What were your key takeaways? Are you getting a sense there may be a strategy shift here?
No, I mean, they're definitely evolving. The phases or sort of the stages of this plan is evolving. We've been talking about that, but it was interesting to hear the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Dan Kane, really lay it out today that the U.S. has made, it seems, a lot of effort and seems they've made a lot of success, had a lot of success in taking out some of Iran's air defense systems, and that's allowing them to move further into the country and allowing them to take more manned strikes. So the big question is, we've been hearing for several days from Marco Rubio, from President Trump, about this big new phase that's coming, this big offensive of this. And is that going to be a huge manned aircraft influx deeper into the country? Based off the way that they were talking about today, that's what it seems like.
Well, and picking up on that point, the Trump administration reportedly considering arming Kurdish opposition forces to help defeat the Iranian regime, I should say. What are you hearing about that? How quickly could that happen?
So that seems to be, it doesn't seem like anything has been decided. They've been in discussions, but that seems like that would sort of be the last or one of the last phases of this, right? So once the military mission, which again, they've been telling us about, defeating the Navy, defeating the ballistic missile, presumably at some point going after the nuclear program, even though we have not seen that yet. I'm starting to get the sense that's going to be one of the final stages of the military campaign here. And then they're going to have to turn to this idea of setting the conditions for the potential toppling of this regime, which is already very weakened, but not down and out. So the idea of arming the Kurds is something that where you could have individuals who are against the Iranian regime who would basically be the people on the ground. Think about something like Syria, right, where you had the Syrian Democratic Forces armed, trained, supported by the U.S., but the U.S. weren't really fighting against the regime. They were supporting the SDF. We might see something like that if, in fact, the U.S. decides to do this.
Well, President Trump has been very clear that he said that there could be U.S. casualties. There now have been 6 U.S. forces killed. Courtney, that was raised today at the briefing. We're learning more about the fallen soldiers. What are you learning?
Yeah, that's right. So we know the identities of 4 of those individuals who were killed. The other 2 have not yet been identified because they died and were found slightly after the other 4. We heard from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He spoke very eloquently today about remembering their sacrifice and their honoring their families and continuing to honor them and their service. But then we had a slightly different tone from Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. He was somewhat critical of the fact that the media are focusing so much on these fallen individuals and not on some of the other things that are happening, including the military successes that he says the U.S. is having. Here's a bit about what he had to say.
This is what the fake news misses. We've taken control of Iran's airspace and waterways without boots on the ground. We control their fate. But when a few drones get through or tragic things happen, it's front page news. I get it. The press only wants to make the president look bad, but try for once to report the reality. The terms of this war will be set by us at every step.
Fallen troops on the battlefield will always be front page news.
Yeah, that is for sure. And there's going to be a lot of focus on that moving forward. Courtney, thank you. As always, good to see you.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.